Welcome to Soul Therapy with Chelle. I am Chelle Griffin and I practice as a soul doula. I combine therapeutic knowledge and lived experience with a healthy dose of spiritual exploration. Feel welcome to join me as we learn and grow together, exploring the magic and wonderment of experiencing life on earth as a spiritual being. Well, welcome back to Soul Therapy with Chelle, and I have two amazing guests with me today. I have Rachel Samson and Jessie Stern, who are the co-authors of Beyond Difficult. Beyond Difficult is just such a wonderful book. I'm really excited to share this book with you both. Welcome, Rachel and Jessie.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much.
So excited to have you here. Now, Rachel, you are a clinical psychologist in Australia. You're also a lecturer, writer and speaker, and recognised as a relationships and parenting expert. So Rachel is regularly featured in the media, from radio, print and television to podcasts and across social media, where she's known for her platform at Australian Psychologist. And you can find her on Instagram there. Dr. Jessie Stern has a PhD and is an American psychologist, researcher and assistant professor at Pomona College, and that's based in California.
Claremont, California. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And her work, including more than 50 research articles and book chapters on relationships, have been featured by CNN, The Conversation, Scientific American, and other outlets. Jessie is a frequent speaker on topics such as attachment and empathy, child and adolescent development, and mental health. Before I get into my next comment, just want to share a little bit about Beyond Difficult. So the blurb on the back, which we always love to share, is, do you sometimes dread work because you don't want to face more drama with a coworker? Have you spent significant time and money on therapy trying to work on painful romantic relationships that ultimately become messy breakups? Do you ever walk away from an unpleasant conversation wishing you had known how to handle it better in the moment? This book is for you. I can imagine myself walking around holding this book and just referring to it as a Bible. Just, how do I respond? I know for myself, I'm not a lover of conflict, like who is? But I have those moments where, like, you look back and go, oh, now the comeback has popped in. So I imagine just picking out the book, go, one moment, what would Rachel and Jessie say? It's going to be a really helpful and important tool for parents all over, humans really, to understand why they are the way they are, why others are the way they are, and how to improve their communication and relate to the other and be with the other. Does that feel like a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And that's certainly our hope in writing the book. I think it's a universal experience that we have all dealt with a difficult person. We've probably been someone's difficult person at some point. And you're right, in the moment, it's really hard to know how to respond, especially if we've got a lot of our own stuff being triggered or we're caught off guard. So it's definitely our hope that this book gives people insight into why people might be difficult, and then really practical strategies for how you might handle that when you face your next encounter with a difficult person.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is true for many authors, but I felt like I was helping to write the book that I sometimes needed in my own life when dealing with difficult people. So I hope that people find it useful. It was useful to write it with Rachel because on my end, I knew a lot about the research on relationships, but Rachel was really involved in practical application with clients and with difficult relationships. So it felt like a really beautiful friendship and marriage of our two sets of expertise. I wouldn't have known how to put some of these ideas into action without her.
And that leads into, how did you two come to meet? Because you're both living on opposite sides of the world.
So Rachel and I met at a training for people who are interested in the strain situation, which is the gold standard way of measuring attachment in infancy and early childhood. And This is a kind of intensive 2-week training at the University of Minnesota, and people come from all over the world. And it's kind of like a summer camp for adults who love relationships. So it was my idea of heaven. And I think I met Rachel probably the first or second day and immediately really liked her. We had a lot in common. My husband is Buddhist and she had a meditation practice, so we bonded over that. But just the way that she thought about attachment and her clinical work really appealed to me. And so over the course of those 2 weeks, we got to do what we most loved in this really wonderful environment. And then I feel like, Rachel, you should tell the second half of how we actually became writing partners, because that happened a bit after.
Yeah, so I had been thinking about writing a book, and Jessie and I both write blogs and articles and different things, but I had this idea of bringing together a lot of the themes around attachment and temperament and other interests into a book, initially a book for parents. And so I was thinking about that, and then I spoke to a mutual friend and colleague, Kent Hoffman, who is one of the developers of the Circle of Security parenting program. And he suggested that I get in touch with this wonderful researcher who I think he said is the next big thing in attachment, and her name's Jessie Stern. And I said, well, that's just amazing, because I just met her when I was in Minnesota, and I know her, and he said she would be a wonderful writing partner. And so then we started collaborating on blogs and different ideas for books and things. And then the parenting book was sort of parked for a bit, and then it just so happened that the most wonderful publisher, Firm Press, reached out to me and asked if I would write a book for them and if I'd considered writing a book. And so I said, well, yes, I have been thinking about it, and I have someone I'd love to write it with. And so then we sort of changed course and headed in the direction of Beyond Difficult.
So what made you both land on particularly focusing on working with difficult people?
So I think the themes in a parenting book were around what parents might perceive as difficult and looking at the reasons for some of the behaviours that parents would perceive as difficult. So attachment, children's needs, their temperament. And then for a number of reasons, we went in the direction of writing for an adult audience, for individuals rather than for parents. And so many of the ideas that we would have included in a parenting book were just as applicable for adults. And so that's how that focus of the book came to be.
I really love that aspect and that direction that you've chosen, because it firstly widens your audience to beyond parents, but it also allows parents to be able to look at their own childhood, observe the attachment styles that they experience or lack of, and do their own healing and work around that so that they can make different choices in their parenting style. That's just magic. That's what the world needs, especially right now.
Definitely. I also often think about how so much difficult adult behavior is very much an analog to a toddler's tantrum. And it comes from often very similar places of feeling threatened, insecure, vulnerable in some way. But in an adult, it can be much more consequential for relationships, right? And when you're encountering someone who's behaving in this difficult way, sometimes seeing the inner child, seeing their vulnerable place that's being expressed can be helpful for at least starting from a sense of compassion. So I do think that the parenting view is still very relevant to thinking about adults.
It can take the fire out of the moment, I guess, and really start to diffuse and allow at least one person in the conversation to dig deep and find that compassion and check in what's going on with you right now, just like we would with our kids. Yeah.
And it's a different lens, isn't it? Thinking about what's driving the behavior in front of us in the moment. It's so easy to react to it and to think, this person's just a jerk. That's why they're being this way. And then we're going to choose how we respond based on that interpretation of the situation. But if we're applying this lens that, I think is more popular for parents to apply, to interactions with their kids, trying to think about what's going on underneath the behavior, then I think we've got a wider range of choices for how we respond to an adult in front of us as well.
Absolutely. I'm just picturing like moments where I'm driving in the car and someone, cuts you off and or they give you the finger and you're like, hang on, go, oh, okay, must be having a bad day. Rather than escalating and flipping the bird back to them, you come from it from a different perspective and go, okay, I can let that go, not take that on and make it my own and take it personally and just send them some love energetically instead and hope that, that ripple effect has more impact than their reaction to you.
Yeah, and you just touched on something that we talk about quite a bit in the book, which is personalization. And we may talk more about that in a bit, but that's such an important thing to be aware of, that we can personalize other people's behavior. And again, that's going to determine how we react. If we feel like, you're doing this to me, you're doing it because it's something about me, or you don't like the way that I'm driving my car or whatever it is, when actually it might not be personal at all. If the person's had a bad day or they have difficulty regulating anger, that's going to be happening across the board for them, not just in that interaction with us. And so I think just being aware of personalization is one of the strategies that we think could be most helpful when we are experiencing these tricky moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw, Rachel, you put this comment on social media that really stood out for me. I felt really seen when I read it. And you said you wrote this book in the margins of motherhood. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm achieving so much in the margins of motherhood.
Right.
These little spots of time. Would you like to share more about that? Like, how did you make that time? How were you able to find that balance, to be able to prioritize?
Yeah, well, there was no balance, the first thing. And I had to take the hours from somewhere. And so often it came from my sleep. And so I had very short sleeps for a while. I've got a toddler who has low sleep needs, so he doesn't need as much sleep as the average toddler. And he's an owl type, so he goes to bed very, very late. So it was waiting until he had fallen asleep, and then I would get the laptop out sometimes 10, 11, 12 o'clock and be writing at that time. And I also I consult sort of 3 or 4 days a week. So there was another day that family would mind him and I could get some writing done then. But yes, there were times where I was so tired writing on my laptop on the bedroom floor. And I would think, I'm just going to rest my eyes for a minute, and I'd wake up next to the laptop, a little while later. So yes, there wasn't any balance, but it was just about, prioritizing things, and sleep was the thing that was sacrificed.
I can so relate to the falling asleep on the floor next to your child. While for me, it's usually reading a book. I have been writing a book for a few years now, and it's so stop-start. So I take my hat off to anyone that's actually been able to get a first draft completed, let alone published and ready to go out in the world. And with a toddler, that's, especially a little night owl.
Yes.
I get that. I was the night owl too.
Yeah, there's a few of us.
Yeah, maybe we're all writers.
Maybe he's a future writer.
Maybe. And Jessie, what was the experience like for you working with Rachel and finding that time to write the book in amongst your extraordinary busy schedule as well, working at the college?
Yeah, well, I think our writing journey began around the time that my husband and I and my elderly mother were all moving cross country from Virginia to this new job in California. So there was a lot of upheaval during that period. And in some way, I think having this writing practice or writing deadline was a good anchor point. There was something I was working on before the big transition that I knew I would continue working on after. That said, I don't recommend writing a book while you're moving 2 households. my brother's and ours.
Or across country.
I can't say I'd recommend it to anybody, but it's great to have a co-author because you have the social support and also the accountability. You know, I knew that I needed to get some chunk done and off to Rachel so she could look at it. And actually the time zone difference worked out in a nice way because I could work on it during the day, you know, right until I could no longer think straight and then send something off to her and she'd have it then when I was asleep. And so that all worked out really well. And then starting as a professor, my quote unquote kids were my students. Yeah. So they took up most of the daytime for me. And I would also write in the evenings, but I didn't have a little person keeping me very late. But I did have grading papers that kept me up sometimes. So like Rachel said, there was no balance, but it was still fun. Yeah.
Well, it's lovely to see you both smiling about it, at least, that you've survived it together.
And it was so lovely writing together and that experience of having a co-author. Like I think I don't have experience of writing a book on my own, but I imagine that it is such a different experience. It was, you know, a friendship and something we were doing together as friends and someone to bounce ideas all the way through. Like it was definitely made the experience, I think, for me.
Absolutely. And writing is such an isolating process. So having your person there alongside you and experiencing the similar blocks and writing blocks and trying to figure out the direction of a particular chapter or, like you said, being able to bounce those ideas off would be every writer's dream, I imagine.
Particularly writing a book about relationships. It would have been strange to do that in isolation. So I think having a book about relationships happening within the context of a friendship was very informative. And it made the process a lot less lonely. I often will hear writers talk about, writing is such a lonely process. And it didn't feel that way. It felt like, no, I have a collaborator who I can bounce ideas off of. And if something doesn't work, she's going to tell me. I don't have to be the arbiter or my own self-critic because I have somebody I trust to give me feedback.
And be able to put your theories to the test as well with each other. And put that into practice. If there was ever a time that you didn't agree on the direction you were taking, and being able to have those conversations and work through that together is testament to the quality of your work and the book that you've produced. That's just magic right there. And that concludes part 1 of our conversation with Rachel Samson and Dr. Jessie Stern, who co-wrote the book Beyond Difficult. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and it's provided you with some insight into how to be with difficult people and have the difficult conversations. Thank you for showing up for yourself by listening to Soul Therapy with Chelle. Feel welcome to subscribe to my podcast, share the pod with your friends, family, colleagues and neighbours. And please, if you are willing, I would absolutely love a 5-star review to give my little pod a boost in the algorithms. For further detail on how to work with me, please visit my website, www.chellegriffin.com, or find me on the socials. I hope you'll join me on my next episode. Till then, go gently and intentionally. With care, Chelle.